Okay, in this lecture, I'm going to show you database first workflow in action. So I'm going to start with creating a simple table, and then I will have Entity Framework generate a domain class based on that table. So let's get started. So here in SQL Server Management Studio, I've got a database called Database First Demo. I'm going to create a new table. I'm going to use this table for storing posts in a blog. Okay, I'm back and the table is ready. Now, here's the tricky part of database first approach. We have this database here locally, but in order to bring a different database, like a test database or a production database, to this version, we need a mechanism. There are tools out there that can compare two databases and bring them to the same version. But in my experience, they are not always reliable and can sometimes cause issues due to dependency between tables and records. A more reliable, flexible, but unfortunately more manual approach is to create a change script every time we make a change to our database. Then we can store these change scripts somewhere in the repository and run them on any database to bring them to the current version. So in this demo, I'm going to go with that approach. So I'm going to create a change script here. And I'm going to store this as, here's a sequence number and a description. Okay, and finally, I'm going to save this table. Okay, so the table is ready in my database. Let's refresh. Beautiful. Now I'm going to go to Visual Studio, create a new project, and import this database and its tables into my project. Okay, so start with a new project. I'm going to stick to a console application for now because we don't want to get distracted by the complexity of web applications or WPF applications. So let's just keep it simple and focus on Entity Framework. Database first, demo. Okay, with a new project, the first step is to install Entity Framework. And to do that, we use Package Manager Console. So Tools, NuGet Package Manager Console. So we run install package Entity Framework. Beautiful. So here I got Entity Framework version 6.1.3. Now we go to Solution Explorer. Right-click the project. Add. New item. ADO.NET Entity Data Model. So this is going to be our conceptual model that represents the mapping between the database tables and our domain classes. So I'm going to give it a name like blog model. And in this window, I'm going to use Entity Framework Designer from database because I already have a database. Next. And here we need to specify a connection to our database. So Microsoft SQL Server, continue. Okay, here's my database. Test the connection. Beautiful. Okay. Next. So at this point, Entity Framework looks at our database and discovers the tables, views, stored procedures, and functions we have there. So currently we only have tables. And here's my table. So I'm going to tick all of this and leave the rest as is. Finish. You get this security warning about running this template can potentially harm your computer. Don't worry about it. So just click do not show this message again, because Visual Studio is trying to run a template to generate some code. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, here's our entity data model, which is stored in a file with the EDMX extension. And here you see a class called post, which is exactly like the table I created earlier. Let's go to Solution Explorer. Okay, let's expand blog model EDMX. What you see here is all designer generated code. There are two parts that are important here. What is the first one? Blog model.context.tt. So TT stands for T4 template. It's a way to generate code based on a template. If we expand this, we see the actual generated code. So here's a C# class that Entity Framework generated for me. And this class derives from dbContext. dbContext is a class that is an abstraction over the database. So it provides a simple API to load the data from or save it to the database. Now I scroll down a little bit. Look, we have a property of type dbSet called posts. A dbSet represents a table in the database. So because in our database we have a table called posts, here we have a dbSet of type post called posts. Now this post class you see here is again generated code. So back to Solution Explorer. This was the context template. So here's the template. And the code that you just saw, this dbContext, was generated based on this template. Now let's take a look at the other template. Blog model template. So here's the template code. And if we expand this, we see the post class. Look, it has 4 properties based on the columns I currently have in the database. So the key thing here is we started with a database, we created our table, and then we imported that into our entity data model. Every time I want to make a change in my model, I start with the database. And then I come back to my EDMX file or entity data model and refresh it. And at this point, Entity Framework will update my domain classes as you see here. So here's the database first workflow. Okay, now let me show you how we can use a dbContext to work with the database. And this applies to both database first and code first. So I'm going to close all the windows here. Okay. Then I go to Program. Here I'm going to create an instance of our dbContext class, which is called Database First Model Entities. Now I'm going to create a new post and initialize it here. Now, in a real-world application, most often we'll use an identity column, so we don't have to specify an ID here. But for now, it doesn't matter because I just want to show you the workflow. And finally, I'm going to add this post to our dbSet and save the changes. So context.posts.add. So we add it to the dbSet, and at this point, changes are only in the memory. Nothing is committed to the database yet. So context.save changes. That's it. Now let's run the application. Done. So as easy as that. Note that I did not have to write a store procedure. I did not have to work with ADO.NET classes like SQL connection and SQL command. Entity Framework took care of all of this for me. Now let's verify that it worked. So I'm going to go to Management Studio. And let's take a look at our table. There you go. We got this record in the database. Now, reading data from database is as easy as what you saw. And that's what I'm going to cover later in this course. So this was database first workflow in action. In the next lecture, I'm going to show you code first. And then I will do a comparison between the two.